Alright, welcome back everyone. I actually made myself up this time. Haven't done full goth attire in a while. It's hard to do with NTOS. It's hard to get into a fishnet shirt. I've been sick lately. It might be COVID. I've lost my sense of taste and smell. I can't taste or smell these. And I've started... Whoops. There we go. I have started smoking these. I haven't smoked cigarettes in 7 years. And I cannot taste or smell these. I don't know. Anyway, so there was an argument. I want to try to make this quick. I'm trying to get some other videos done too. But somebody made the argument to me that they want they want their kids to be safe. That I guess supposedly people who aren't reproducing, people who don't have kids, can't understand, and that the things that they advocate for as far as political philosophy or societal philosophy goes pertains to what they want for their kids in the future. I have a feeling it's very theistically inclined, but there's some interesting things with this. It's not entirely. To me, that's a very vague and ambiguous statement. I'm about to explain why. All right. We just want our kids to be safe. The primary position is what form of government will provide this. Well, let's start with the ambiguity of this that comes across from the get-go. First of all, this is predominantly what most people with and without kids want. Yes, even people without kids want the fulfillment and betterment of society for future generations. Even though they don't have kids, they still want this. I suppose unless you're an ephalist or antinatalist. I have to switch hands. Anyway. People without kids may not explicitly advocate for kids they do not have, but they do advocate for a society that fosters better care for themselves and future generations. The reason I say this is ambiguous is we have to ask what the definition of a quote-unquote better society looks like. And it would seem to many this is entirely subjective. For example, if you are a racialized nationalist, the position is something like, if we do not make society more tolerable and favorable for our race X, whatever that is, whatever race X is, then we will go extinct or possibly be treated like second-class citizens, as we will be a minority. This argument is given on the premise that race X, kids and future generations, will be protected in their rights as well as many other things. I would add, though, that this usually comes at the cost of some current minority or other race X, Y, and Z's rights to be impinged upon. Then there is the position of people who do not care what color their genetic lineage is, which I personally find to be much more rational. And they will make political arguments for policy that will make the society better for everyone and not just one group of people. The problem with the first example is they usually participate in spreading fictitious propaganda insisting that, quote, if you do not protect your own race, bad thing will inevitably happen. This, of course, is ridiculous, as none of us are psychic and can predict the future. And if you say you can, I will call you a liar. This propaganda is based on a very old fallacy of manipulation tactic known as fear-mongering, and is not reliable at all, as history has shown. The fact of the matter is that cultish-like behavior and dogma results in something that many societies the world over perceive as a tragedy and urge people to learn from these old or ancient people's cultish and dogmatic beliefs as something to never do ourselves. Yet, to this day, fear, paranoia, and hype are still spread across the land, and we end up with more cults, more dogma, and more conspiracies that do society no good. The perpetrators of this propaganda will insist that it is a lie and claim moral superiority as well as intellectual superiority, usually based on ambiguous claims or claims that have more to do with correlation and not causality or causation. This will make it look very real to many people. Many people fall for this. One such example of this, aside from Nazi-occupied Germany, is when communists were burning the corpses of dead piety members in a statement of radical and dogmatic atheism. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, logically, to burn a corpse to rid the country of theism when you do not even believe in a spirit of any kind. Yet this insanity happened and was performed by very sane people. So where do you stand on the stage of dogma, fear, paranoia, and hype for today's issues? Are you worried that gays, transgendered, or some other group will destroy society? Race X or others? Are you worried the entire system will collapse on itself? Well, as I said, no one can predict the future, and we really don't know. It is doubtful, however, because any group you can name has already been in existence, and the only thing that is different now is we do not treat them like second-class citizens. That's about it. The best way to approach politics in regards to a safe society for children is to approach politics from a politically unbiased perspective. The best way to do it is to look at each situation as it comes from a politically neutral point of view and make a decision based on our best understanding of logic, reason, and critical thinking. This is where we meet a crosshair, as some actually prefer to live or have the opinion that a totalitarian government is best, while others see an ever-progressing society towards maximizing freedoms as the best. This is why it is entirely subjective, as some perceive one thing and others perceive it in another. Ultimately, the battle being fought here is authoritarianism versus anti-authoritarianism. Or is it? The reality of the matter is we need law, order, and other types of authoritarian methods to keep other types of authoritarianism under control, such as rapists, murderers, child molesters. Make no mistake, the laws against that kind of behavior, including laws against hate crimes, is authoritarianism. To fight authoritarianism. Most democratized countries have laws or a constitution that illustrates bigger authoritarian threats, such as anti-authoritarian rule, or anti-monarchical rule clauses, or clauses that state there should never be a consolidation of power into the hands of one group or individuals. Again, this is just another example of using authoritarianism to fight against authoritarianism. All of this has been done with both concepts in mind, that not just ensuring a better world for your children or others' children's, but for society as a whole, which is the same thing we do today. Not only does society move forward socially, but technologically, which throws a huge monkey wrench in our understandings for future generations. Let me give one hypothetical example. Let's say that we move so far into the future that we, at some point, possess the ability to detect the brain malfunction within the brain synapses that causes a sociopath to kill, and we can remove it or fix it from within the brain's synapses. Now, there are a ton of moral and ethical questions that will follow this technological procedure that we today are not equipped to argue for or against at this time. The reason being is that we have no idea how this technology works or what it even does to make a moral or ethical decision on. Another thing to make it even more confusing is that this will bring the punishment of law and order under question, as we will now have a technology to literally undo a brain malfunction that would cause someone to kill, rape, or molest. If we can detect and cure it upon birth before any crime is committed, this would have major ramifications of reform for our justice system alone. This is not our fight or our argument, though at this day and age we do not possess such a technology. The moral and ethical questions that come about due to such an advancement are meant for the future generations that will have to deal with it. The best we can offer future generations on our insight is by hypotheticals, I guess. But predominantly what we have learned from our own mistakes. Undoubtedly, there will be another fallacy committed here, as it has shown to be the case for many generations, is an appeal to tradition fallacy. People will say, well, they dealt with the situation X back in the day, and that worked, so we should stick with situation X. And the problem is, situation X no longer applies. For example, it would probably not be a good idea for the majority of the population to engage in homosexuality when the human population is extremely low. I would like to add, this does not entail the persecution of homosexuals, because they can in fact still reproduce, just not conventionally. When the population is as high as it is today, though, this is nowhere near an issue. In fact, some sort of population control is needed, and there are various ways of population control that are more ethical and moral than war or killings, i.e. homosexuality, abortion, contraceptives, vasectomies, and other forms of infertility. Again, all this is done for the overall success and health of a society, and not a particular group or a single individual. Could a world government be a good or bad thing? My answer to that is exactly. It really all depends now, doesn't it? Will the world government be a dictatorship or a free nation? Do you as an individual seek dictatorship or a free nation? Those are actually very deep questions with many subcategories. Like, for instance, you may want a free nation, But some cultural aspects from another society have influenced this world government and now has perceivably notes of a dictatorship as a result. Or maybe you want a totalitarian world government, but some societies have influenced aspects of a free nation that will not sit right with you. Out of those possibilities, one must take into account that is not what we live in, and any generation that might, that is for them to decide, and will become their issue on an already subjective matter. How we view a world government today may not have any basis of reality for future generations that will be living in it. They may look back at our naive perspective of the world of a world government and laugh, as it may turn out in a way we have not foreshadowed at all, such as what certain areas are allocated to different societal structures or ways of life. And that's something that ultimately could be done, is that they could allocate areas in a global government. They could say, well, okay, this is more for the rebellious type. This is more for the feral democracy type. Stuff like that. Or here's a society for LGBTQIA+. Here's a society that is more multicultural. Here's a society that's more ethno-oriented. That's a possibility. That's something that could be done. We don't know. It's all speculative. Ultimately, we can only guess, as we do not know, and all we truly have to work with is our understanding of the past and what we do and know in the now. And that is all we can do. Personally, what I would push for is what Richard Dawkins called an anti-Darwinian society, and where we have outsmarted Mother Nature itself, slowly progressing towards ultimate or maximized freedoms as humanly possible. And this falls in line with the philosophical principle of potentialism. Technically, the definition of civilization is the very height of which society can obtain. And there's potential there. What's the potentialism? Have we reached it? Or can we go further? We don't know. It's an assumption either way. If we can make the assumption this is as best as it can be, that's an assumption. If we could say, no, it can be better, that's also an assumption. We know it can be worse because we have examples of that. We don't have examples of other. I genuinely think this is the best solution, not just for your children, but others' children and future generations to come. Safer ways to deal with addiction and drug abuse where they are not criminalized, or maybe they can participate in the use as a means to overcome depression and the existential crisis that which is life. Only now there is not a risk of death, or has been minimized, as well as better ways to stray off addiction with no problems. Making sure everyone, your children, and everyone else's children, and the future generations, have access to health care for prolonged living and an emphasis on quality of life as well as longevity. Making sure everyone is adequately educated and are actually able to pursue their very real yet very realistic aspirations instead of jobs for survival only. Right now, due to the fear-mongering of opiate medications and the cultish activities of anti-opiate zealots, people are in real trouble should they become chronic pain patients or when it finally comes down to end-of-life treatment. This is something we all must face. You, You will face it, your children will face it, and everyone else that lives within society. This extension of the war on drugs is going to hurt you, your loved ones, and your children, and everyone else and future generations, as the idea of quality of life is no longer considered. I had a conversation with Final Fantasy where I brought this up in different context, actually. Can you imagine having thanatophobia while you're on your deathbed? And if you don't know what thanatophobia is sort of an irrational fear of death. It is a fear of death where it's a sort of panic and anxiety thing. It's where you hyper-focus on death over and over and over and over again, to the point where it initiates a panic or anxiety attack. That's what thanatophobia is. Well, opiates can help with that, as they also help with chronic pain patients get some of their quality of life back, as well as functionality. The logic behind that escapes me as it goes. We can help euthanize you, but we don't want you addicted. And even if you prefer life with a consequence of addiction, these people would still prefer death. I will never understand that logic. Never. You can die, but you can't be addicted. Never mind that if you are a chronic pain patient, or especially at end-of-life care, being addicted to opiates is probably the very fucking least of your concerns. So yes, I say get rid of prohibitions. They don't make sense, as they cause more harm than any kind of good, and that is for your children, other people's children, you, me, and the rest of our society and future generations. And I'd also like to add to that this conceit of trying to keep people from drug use doesn't even work. And I think it's interesting that a lot of conservative arguments is, we want to go back, we want to go back, we want to go back. Well, guess what? If we go back to the founding, when the United States finally became the United States, the Constitution, all that, no drug, none, were illegal in this country. None. Yeah, that's right. The early days of United States, people were engaging in things that many of these conservatives would consider degenerate. We had opium dens in the United States. We had marijuana dens. We sold cocaine over the fucking counter. None of these drugs were made illegal until the 1920s, and that's a fact. Really, not even that long ago. 1920s. That's when drugs were finally made illegal. So I think we're to elaborate even more, like what I advocate for is when I make arguments on societal philosophy, societal progression, political philosophy, politics stuff, I'm not really concerned so much, like, I know I'm a leftist, I usually go that route, but I'm not really concerned if it falls on the left or the right or whatever. I'm really more concerned with what is the most rational or logical thing. And it would seem that, from my perspective, the most rational or logical conclusions tend to be perceived by conservatives as being very radical. I don't know that they are, and the thing people have got to grasp is that things are changing in ways that the founding fathers, the founding people of this country, could never have fathomed. They could never have understood that we were ever going to embark or engage in certain types of conflict. like technological advancements and developments. I'm not saying that Marxism is necessarily a good idea. I'm not saying that communism is necessarily a good idea. I'm not advocating for the destruction or dismantlement of capitalism, but I'm saying it may be possible or inevitable that capitalism at some point will become antiquated. Even if we go back to barter and trade, capital comes from the word cattle or cowheads, if you didn't know. It goes back to barter and trade is essentially a type of capitalism. That's where the word comes from, capitalism. It comes from cowheads and trading cows for goods, services, commodity commerce. But as we move forward into the future and things become automated, we should really be asking ourselves, what are we going to do? Because the system of commodity and commerce or the trading of bartering of goods and services are based upon capital. Sorry, I'm sick. So when we don't have jobs to make money, what are we going to do? And I'm not saying Marx is the answer. I'm not saying communism is the answer. I don't know. I'm just saying that at some point, capitalism may no longer be relevant. And actually on the social, on what is it called? Not social economics. Social, China has it. Social currency. Black Mirror, the series on Netflix, they have an episode where they show what social currency looks like in a free market society. And it looks pretty grim. Everybody basically becomes fake plastic people because everyone's rated on a 5-star rating system. And everyone can rate each other. And I suppose you could argue that, well, you have the freedom or the choice to be to obtain your self-expression that people may like or dislike, or you could capitulate to the social norm and be a fake plastic person. I don't know that that's freedom, though. I don't know that that's any way that someone should want to live. I really think you should go and see it. It's very interesting, and it's very dystopian looking. I don't like the way that it sounds. Like every interaction you have with random strangers and people and everyday life, if you just say one wrong thing, if they subjectively perceive that as a bad thing or as a bad interaction, boop, 1 star, and your social rating goes down. So what do we do for obtaining resources and goods and services in a system where jobs have been, because we can't all be robotic technicians, right? That's not very realistic. What are we going to do? That's something that maybe we should be discussing and bring to the table. Right or left wing, it makes no difference. Because let's be honest, the companies, they love automation because it's cheaper. Machines don't need holiday pay, they don't need vacation, they don't need healthcare, they don't need 401ks, they don't need a lot of requirements that biological organisms do. And so from a financial perspective, it makes sense, well, when the whole job market is saturated with it, and we're left with nothing, what is the answer then? How do we obtain money to exchange goods and services at that point? And like I said, I'm not saying Marxism is the answer. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that, well, if that is the path that we're going on, if we want to keep the current system of capitalism that we have, capitalism has got to adapt or we need to adapt to the change, because change is going to happen no matter what you want. And it doesn't matter if you're conservative, it doesn't matter if you're elected, it doesn't matter. It's going to change. Things that stagnate tend to ferment. But I mean, this is why I advocate for social safety nets. It's like, I don't think it's good to have a society where we think it's acceptable for people to live on the streets. It's like, what about affordable housing? I'm not saying I'm not saying everybody should live like billionaires, okay? That's ridiculous. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it doesn't look good when we want to say, oh, we're humanitarian, I care about the human species, I care about the human race. And it's like there's people living on the street. And that's what I'm establishing a standard basic living. I don't think it's that hard. And especially the way that we have tapped into resource production in the industrialized world. It's not undoable. It's not unrealistic. It's completely doable to have affordable housing. I don't think that people should be pooping on the streets. They should poop in a toilet. That would be the sanitary thing to do. Having access to healthcare, and just because it's a public thing, publicly funded, doesn't mean that it has to suck. That's one thing that really bothers me about when the government does implement those types of things. They always make it really fucking shitty. And I never understand why. It's like, you don't have to make it shitty. There's just things that are common sense. Like, why would you do it this way? And I really do hear the right-wing people, the conservatives. I do hear your plight for choice. And I do think that choice should be preserved. I think that you should have it like, if we do have a national health care policy, I think that we should do it, that you have the choice to have national health care, which is paid for by taxes that you pay during tax season. So when you do your taxes, you pay this tax for NHS. Then you have NHS for the year. But you don't get penalized if you don't have health insurance. So you also have the option of no health insurance. However, if you need major surgery or something like that, that's going to fall on you to pay it. And then there's the option of privatized health insurance. I think those options and the freedom of choice should be preserved. Absolutely. But when they tried to initiate NHS in the US, what did we get? It ended up hurting the people that we who wanted it were trying to protect. Because people who didn't have health insurance, instead of getting health insurance, they got penalized for not having it. Why didn't they have it? Because they couldn't afford it. So how does penalizing them with a fine help? That doesn't help at all. That's you've missed the point. So yeah, I think choice does need to be preserved. Absolutely. So having a multicultural society, that's not going to be the collapse of society. That's silly. That's ridiculous. Where's your evidence of that? Where's your evidence that if you allow gay people to exist in society equally to the normative hetero counterpart, which is that is the default, okay, gays, LGBT, homosexuals only make up 10% of the population, so we're a minority. But I looked at the Constitution, I was looking through like how it reads and everything. I tend to notice this is that they don't want a minority rule, but they don't want a majority rule either. They don't want the majority to override minorities' rights and liberties. Because both are dangerous. Majority rule is dangerous because majority is not always right. Minority rule can be extra dangerous because the minority is not always right. But what you want to do is you want to make sure majority or minority, that you have equality, and that you have access or that your civil rights, liberties, and freedoms are not impinged upon. No, allowing gay people to marry is not going to destroy society, and it has nothing to do with religion. I don't give a damn if your church doesn't want to recognize gay marriage. I'm an atheist. I don't care about that. The problem is, as I brought this up many times, is legal issues. There's legal issues because marriage has been brought to the state. That's something that happened. I don't know what to tell you. Giving trans people, and trans people are even a lesser percentage than gay people. They're only like, 1 or 2% of the population? And you act like giving these people rights that they're just going to, the LGBTQIA plus is just going to take over the entire nation. Us and what army, right? I mean, seriously, 10% of the population and then 1 or 2% of the population. We're going to overthrow the majority? Really? You really think that? Okay. And then this whole thing with like the racial, like I said, genetic lineage. There are people with darker toned skin that have white people genetic lineage. There are people who are white with darker skinned genetic lineage. I don't think your eye color, your hair color, your skin color matter. They don't matter. It's aesthetic. And particularly when you look at genetics, genetic diversity, 99.9%, that's a very low genetic diversity. Mind-blowingly low. Mind-blowing. I brought this up before. 2 types of domestic house cats. They're different breeds. They're the same species. But they have enough genetic diversity to call them different breeds. Human beings don't even have that. We don't even have enough genetic diversity to be called different breeds. We're really just different colored types of one breed of something, of human. And that's really it. The percentage of your genetics that determine your eye color, hair color, skin color are all in like a 0.01%. That's it. That's it. 2 different breeds of domestic house cat, you're looking at a genetic variance of like 39%. That they're the same species, but they're a different breed, and they have a 39% genetic variance. This means that, guess what? Race really isn't all that. So I don't think granting liberties and freedoms and making sure that we maintain equal rights for other ethnic groups is going to be the downfall of society. It's not about skin color, it's about protecting human beings. And that's what we are. We're just all human beings. I like to say human people monkeys. All of us, including myself. I'm a human people monkey. I like to sit around and play with my genitals and poop and pee and eat. And one of the things that I love when theists like to tell me, like, we're not descendants of chimps. Because, I mean, we're not descendants of monkeys, it's chimps. But, you know, it's just, you know, a funny sort of joke in my head, like an inside joke for myself. Actually, a friend of mine who's a biotechnician as well. The whole thing behind it. I'm not going to go into it, but I've had some theists say like, oh, we're more civilized. Oh, really? You sure? And they might bring up something like flinging poop. Are you sure people don't do that? I spent 15 years working in fast food management for one of the biggest multi-conglomerate fast food it wasn't a franchise, it was a corporation, probably in the world, which is McDonald's. And I can tell you, people will fling poop. I've had to clean it off the walls. It's disgusting. And another thing with the conservatives is this whole, like, chastity, abstinence. It's almost like you think that adultery has never been a thing until now. No. Adultery came into being as soon as marriage came into being. Before this arrangement stuff, go back to tribalist days, we fucked out of wedlock. The concept of adultery is not new. The concept of promiscuity within the human species is not new. It's not from liberal sentiments. Even in Victorian times, people fucked. It's actually depicted in a lot of artwork from the Victorian age that they used art as a form of insurgence to speak out against the very puritanical views towards sex. So, if you're trying to protect your children from things that exist in the world, like sex, or that gay people exist, or that trans people exist, or that drugs exist, and they might use them, if you think they'll never be exposed to that, you're deluding yourself. Even if you're an uptight person that makes it very clear and you're very adamant that you do not respect those things, well, they may be doing those things behind your back and not telling you. They might do things like have sex before marriage out of wedlock, but it's okay. They did it with a girl and they did it anally to make sure they didn't get pregnant, because abortion is bad. You know, you just, is that freedom? Is that really looking out for the best interest to human beings to suit our psychological and physical needs? Or is it antithetical? I would say that it's antithetical. It's unrealistic. They say, I live in a fantasy land. Well, I think it's fantasy to think that no one will ever have sex until they're married. They will stay abstinent until that time. They will only ever reproduce with the person they are married to. They will never do drugs. They will... Really? Really? You think that? Are you sure? Is that realistic? Because that sounds like fantasy crap. That sounds like what I would call a brain shit. I don't know what else to call it. I have no other words for it other than brain shit. It's not realistic. And I'm going to get off topic into something else, but the Frankfurt School of Philosophers, yeah, they started pointing out some really interesting flaws in society. Things that we delude ourselves with. So one of the things Friedrich Nietzsche is famous for, he's famous for saying, we avoid uncomfortable truths. And we do. The fact that we like to fuck, that it's a primitive urge, that sometimes we do it and regret it afterwards because we don't think correctly when we're horny. I'm not advocating for adultery, by the way. I'm just saying it happens. And there's never going to be a world where it doesn't. There's never going to be a world where there isn't drugs. It's just, it doesn't exist. That's unrealistic to think that's going to happen, you know? What we can do is we can make things safer. And we can expand on freedom. We can. Life doesn't have to be miserable. You have a birth, which nobody asked to be born. Life didn't ask to exist. Nobody chooses that. It just happens. And then we have an expiration date. And so from the time that we're born to the end, we have this time in between to enjoy the things that are good. And really what it boils down to is being able to experience those things while we have the cognizance to be consciously aware of our own existence to actually enjoy them. But you can't do that when you have these weird moral busybodies within society saying, no, you can't do that. No, I don't like that. I'm not saying don't live your puritanical lifestyle. If a puritanical lifestyle is what you want to do, under my philosophy, you can do that. But you can also be a degenerate too. It's your choice. That's what I advocate for. I advocate for what is the most rational, logical, and using critical thinking. What I think that is. I don't care if it's Marxist or not. That's irrelevant. Anyway. So let me think, and let me know what you think in the comments section. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Yeah, out.